There was just something really special about the early 90s, and these three movies, they're probably the most 90s things to ever happen back then. We got Sylvester Stallone getting frozen and thawed out in the future, also the Power Rangers on the big screen fighting a 1,000-year-old slime monster, and also Jean-Claude Van Damme traveling through time and, of course, kicking people. And I think it's safe to say that all of these movies are great in their own unique ways, and of course, all of them got video games as well. Hey guys, welcome back. So the question today is, did any of these games do these awesome movies any justice? We're going to be taking a look at Demolition Man on the Genesis, Power Rangers the movie on the Genesis, and of course, Timecop on the Super Nintendo. And I don't want to spoil it, but somehow I think our luck's going to run out at some point. But before it does, let's just get into the most surprising one out of all of them. So first up is Demolition Man, and if you haven't seen this movie, then just stop what you're doing and go watch it right now. Because if you like 80s and 90s style action flicks and you haven't seen this one, then you're really missing out. Stallone plays a cop who gets frozen in cryo prison and then has to save the future from Wesley Snipes, who plays one of the most charismatic villains that the 90s ever produced. Plus, how can you not love a dystopian future where every single restaurant is a Taco Bell? The movie itself was marketed really heavily at the time, so it was pretty much inevitable that a game would follow shortly after, and it did, kinda. The game came out in 1995, 2 full years after the movie came out, and that kind of gap would normally just kill a licensed game dead on arrival, and it pretty much did here as well. By the time this one hit the shelves, the Demolition Man hype train was basically over. It had already hit VHS a year prior, and the Sega CD version unfortunately has this kind of sad distinction of being the very last game that was ever commercially released for the Sega CD, at least in North America. And with all this, you might be thinking that this game is just going to be some shovelware crap that's pushed out the door to make a quick buck for acclaim. But believe it or not, you'd be wrong. What you're actually playing here is pretty much just a run-and-gun action game. You're John Spartan, Stallone's character, working through a version of the film's history. It opens in 1996 Los Angeles and then jumps forward after the cryo thaw and takes place through a sanitized future of San Angeles where everything's super polished and nothing fun is allowed anymore. But as soon as you start playing this thing, it just hits. The side-scrolling sections are genuinely really good, and the shooting in particular feels great, with it being able to make it feel like there's some actual weight and velocity to it that not too many games back then got right. The stages move really fast too, keeping the momentum going, besides a few sections where it's just kinda hard to tell where you need to be going. But in terms of how it actually plays, you've got your standard shoot, jump, and throw setup here. Your basic police handgun is your default weapon, and it does get the job done for the most part, but you can also find a magnum that hits harder, and also a shotgun that fires in a wide spread, which is great for clearing out groups of thugs. You can also shoot any of these in 8 directions, which doesn't sound like that big of a deal, but dudes in this game are just coming at you from everywhere, so you kinda need it. And once you get the hang of how the game moves, it's really easy to run around these levels doing stuff that you'd expect an over-the-top action hero to do. It's insane to me just how few of these movie games on consoles ever got that right. Even if it's a mid-game, you can still make up for it just by making the player feel like you're playing as the dude in the movie, and Demolition Man totally gets that right. It also nails the mood and the look of the movie too. The stages are loaded with detail, and the color and shading for a Genesis game is really well done. Everything just kind of has this moody, almost cinematic quality to it that actually matches the film, with tons of stuff in the stage that you can either interact with or just blow up. There's just stuff going on all the time in these stages too, like you'll be ziplining through a dimly lit cave city, chasing down a runaway train with no lights, or just jumping around any random stage really makes you feel like you're playing the movie. Like I said, this game just hits. And it definitely doesn't look like a game that was rushed out the door, and the developer Alexandria deserves a lot of credit for that. You also get these overhead sections that pop up every few stages or so, and these are much more of like a top-down shooter with enemies coming at you constantly. And even though they do mix things up, these stages just aren't anywhere near as good as the side-scrolling levels. Plus, there's a pretty good amount of slowdown in these sections, and if you ask me, I think I would have just preferred more side-scrolling levels instead of these. One more thing worth knowing if you're going to track this one down, the Genesis and the Super Nintendo versions actually play a little bit differently. The Genesis has a wider field of view, better music, and plus it just plays faster in general. The Super Nintendo version does have a dedicated button for standing still and firing, which sounds minor but can make a real difference in those overhead sections. Most people though, they're going to tell you to go with the Genesis version, and I'd personally agree with that. Demolition Man on the Genesis is a really good action game that just kinda got buried by bad timing. The run and gun gameplay is really tight, and the level design is above average for what you'd usually get in this kind of game. And even though I'm not that big of a fan, the mix of side-scrolling and those overhead sections does do a lot in keeping it from getting stale. GamePro magazine at the time actually called it fast, fun, and explosive. And for once, I think that's pretty accurate. Plus, the actual movie keeps aging like fine wine. Taco Bell being the only restaurant in an entire future where everyone's telling you to feel good about yourself definitely doesn't feel so much like satire these days. Plus, it's still just a hell of an action movie.
We're not trained for this kind of violence.
And the game captures that film's energy way better than it had any right to, and way better than you'd expect from a game coming out from Acclaim. If you've never played this one, carts have gotten a little bit pricey over the years, given how limited the release was back then, but it's still worth hunting down for your collection. And if you want the best version of this one, just go with the Genesis game. Or if you're feeling really fancy, the Sega CD version with all of its glorious low-res FMV is still pretty hot.
Send a maniac to catch me.
But really, any version of Demolition Man you play is gonna be a great blast from the past. Next up is Power Rangers the movie on the Genesis, and I'm just going to say this up front, this is probably the best of any of the Power Rangers games, but we'll get more into that here in just a minute. The movie itself came out in summer of 1995, and it was exactly what it needed to be, being basically just a longer TV episode with a bigger budget, which I don't think too many kids were actually complaining about at the time. Bigger explosions, a villain made literally out of purple slime, and brand new ninja powers was exactly what you wanted from a Power Rangers movie if you were 9 years old that July, and kids everywhere was eating it up. The Genesis game, though, along with all the other movie games, came out that same summer, was developed by Sims and published by Sega. And if you're looking at this and thinking that it looks a little bit different from all the other Power Rangers movie games, well, you're not wrong. That's because there were 4 completely different Power Rangers the movie games across 4 different platforms, each one made by no less than 3 different studios, and none of them were actually ports of each other. Of course, you'd expect the portable games to be different because they're portable, but the Super Nintendo version is from Natsume, and as mentioned, the Genesis version is from Sims, and they look and play completely different from each other. This was just kinda how the mid-90s licensed game machine worked, and depending on what console you had, you were essentially getting a totally different game, and it can be confusing if you were telling your friend how great the Power Rangers game that you were playing was, and then he goes to the video store and ends up getting something completely different, and then he calls you a liar and never speaks to you again. While the Super Nintendo game was a pretty bare-bones beat-em-up that only sorta followed the movie's plot, the Genesis version does some neat story stuff that's actually pretty interesting. Only 3 of the 6 stages actually cover the movie. The other 3 stages are pulled straight from the TV show episodes, so you've kinda got this weird situation where it's simultaneously a movie game and also a Season 2 Greatest Hits package, and I think that's a pretty cool combination. It ends up giving the game more content and variety than just a straight-up movie adaptation would have, though it does have a bad habit of telling rather than showing. Like this whole part about fighting skeletons and stuff in a jungle, which sure would have been fun to play instead of just reading about. At its core, this is just a side-scrolling beat-em-up with 2-player co-op. You get to pick from the 6 movie Rangers and fight your way through 6 stages of oozmen, putties, and whatever else the game wants to throw at you. Unfortunately though, all 6 Rangers are essentially just palette swaps of the same character. They've all got the same moves, same everything, just different colors and different weapons. And the weapons don't really change anything up besides the Pink Ranger using her bow as a projectile attack. And to me, this is by far the game's biggest miss, since every kid wanted their favorite Ranger to do their favorite moves. The Super Nintendo games, for as basic as they were, did kinda get this part right. Here, there's genuinely no reason to pick one over the other. The combat, though, does have a decent enough rhythm to it. Punching dudes feels pretty solid, and you actually have enough health to use your special attack fairly regularly. It keeps things moving even when the enemy variety starts to dry up. And trust me, it starts to dry up really quickly. You literally only fight one enemy throughout the entire first 2 stages, and the rest of the game ain't much better. But the Zord stages are where the game actually earns its keep. Between the regular brawling stages, you get to pick a Zord and then fight giant monsters at full city scale. And that's when the whole game kind of shifts into this one-on-one matchup that feels closer to a fighting game than anything else. This is exactly what a Power Rangers game needs, and it's something the Super Nintendo version didn't even bother to include. These sections also really help mix the game up too, because if it was just those basic brawling stages over and over, things would get really tedious. Plus, it's just always more fun stomping around downtown Angel Grove as a giant robot. Beyond that though, there's really not much else going on here. It does of course have 2-player simultaneous play, and I really think this game would be perfect for another player, because playing it by yourself just doesn't have enough variety in the standard beat-em-up stages to keep your attention, especially since every character plays basically the exact same. Oh, and one more thing. The game actually uses digitized versions of real songs from the show and the movie. And believe it or not, getting actual source material music into a licensed game rather than just some vague approximation of it was sadly not a given in 1995. Power Rangers the movie on the Genesis is exactly what it looks like. A functional, occasionally fun beat-em-up made very specifically for a very specific audience in a very specific moment. The 6 identical Rangers does just straight up suck though, and the enemy repetition sets in before you finish the first stage. But the Zord sections just legit make this game. Also, sticking the TV episodes into the game was actually a really cool addition. For its time though, I think this would have actually been a really solid rental. Definitely worth an afternoon if you had a friend around anyway. And if you were disappointed in the Super Nintendo movie game, I think this one's a solid upgrade in a lot of different ways. It's not gonna blow you away or anything, but this is one game where I think Genesis kids got the best version of what turned out to be a complete grab bag of Power Ranger movie games. And finally, we've got Timecop, a movie where Jean-Claude Van Damme is a time-traveling cop and features a scene where a man literally implodes because he touched a version of his past self, which is crazy because even rookie time travelers should know that the same matter cannot occupy the same space. Obviously, it's a great movie, and it actually did really well, making $100 million worldwide, easily qualifying it to turn it into a really bad game. That game came out in 1995 and was developed by French studio Cryo Interactive and published by JVC. And not surprisingly, it received some of the lowest review scores ever at the time. So yeah, let's just see how bad this one actually is. Cryo Interactive mainly made adventure games and strategy titles, with probably their best known game being Dune for the PC, which as you can see here is very much not a side-scrolling action game. In fact, I don't think they ever made a side-scrolling anything before Timecop. And I'm not kidding when I say that this game shows that in pretty much every possible way. You play as Max Walker, and you can punch, kick, jump, and shoot your way through pretty much everything that's coming at you. And that does sound like a pretty decent set of moves for an action game, except that it feels like Max is just punching and kicking while he's underwater. And that gun would be super useful, except you only start with 3 bullets, and in most stages, you don't get too many more. And once those are gone, you just go back to slowly kicking people in the shins for the rest of the level, because that's the only attack that actually works consistently. It's one of those games that uses digitized animation to its detriment because everything just feels so slow due to the animations taking so damn long to do anything. Like you actually do get an uppercut that does do decent damage, but it takes like a full 3 seconds just to connect with something. You just literally have no time to ever use it. And the craziest thing is that the game doesn't allow you to slowly take out enemies, since every level also has a time limit. So if you move too carefully through the level, the clock's just gonna kill you even if your health bar is completely full. So what you end up doing is just avoiding enemies as much as you can so that you can beat the level before the time limit runs out. The digitized graphics do actually look pretty impressive for the Super Nintendo, I'll give them that much. Max Walker genuinely does look like Van Damme here, but everything just feels so stiff and slow. Even when you do hit someone, they just kind of bounce backwards. There's zero feedback to any of the combat. You're just punching air and hoping that they fall over before they can get a hit in. And speaking of taking hits, you're gonna take a ton, since enemies and obstacles are placed everywhere for maximum controller hurling opportunities. Some of the levels actually expect you to play it more like a shooter, even giving you more ammo, but you can't move more than a few feet before you're just being assaulted from every single angle. But the biggest waste in the game by far are the different time periods. In theory, it's 5 totally different environments and 5 chances to do something interesting with those environments. The future should feel completely different from World War II, and visually they do, I guess, since the backgrounds and enemy outfits change, but the actual gameplay in every single period is basically the same. You run around hopping over enemies and just hope that you can find the exit before the time runs out. The underwater levels are the only ones in the game that actually tries anything different, but I don't really know if this counts. They just kind of make you walk even slower than you already did. Plus, there's possibly the worst shooter stage in history with a vehicle that's so huge that it takes up half the screen. So yeah, I mean, the time travel premise just never really delivers here. But there is one neat thing about this mess of a game. This game is actually a sequel to the film rather than a straight-up adaptation, which I think is pretty cool if you're a fan of the film. The villain in the game is Dr. Heinz Kleindas, the original inventor of time travel, who's declared himself dictator of the universe and captured Walker as he arrives from fixing the events from the film. And for what it is, that's actually a pretty solid premise for a licensed game. They just completely failed to make anything good out of any of it. Also, another neat thing about the game is that the composer for Timecop is actually David Cage. Yes, the same David Cage that would go on to make Heavy Rain, Indigo Prophecy, and a few others. So, before he was making emotional, interactive dramas about the human condition, David Cage was sitting at a computer writing music for Jean-Claude Van Damme kicking a tank in World War II. But all joking aside, the music is probably the best thing about the whole damn game. And if you want a little bit of Timecop trivia that no one's ever going to ask you, there was actually a fully completed Sega CD version of the game that JVC pulled from the publishing deal before it ever came out, though the developer did eventually release the ROM for it online in 2007. So it does exist and you can play it, it was just never sold in an actual store, which is probably for the best. In the end though, Timecop's just a bad game with a great premise and a great movie attached to it as well. The digitized graphics do look decent and the time period structure is a good idea, plus that David Cage soundtrack is kind of fun to listen to. But everything else in this game is just first-rate licensed game garbage. At least the movie still holds up really well. In fact, it's probably my all-time favorite Van Damme movie. But this game is just a good idea wrapped in terrible execution. Again, do yourself a favor and skip this mess, and just go watch the movie or even read the comic instead. And that's 3 very 90s movies and 3 very different outcomes for their games. Demolition Man in particular actually really surprised me. It's a good game that deserved way more attention than it got, and Power Rangers is exactly what it promises to be, if you know what you're walking into. Plus, those sword sections are actually pretty neat. Timecop though, Timecop's just really bad. But what all 3 of these have in common is that they were racing against the clock. Movie licenses live and die on timing. Demolition Man shipped 2 years too late. Timecop Timecop shipped on time, but it just wasn't ready. And Power Rangers, though, hit that window perfectly, and that made all the difference. But that's gonna do it for me this week. If you grew up with any of these movies or games, let me know down in the comments, because I'd love to know which ones you liked or didn't like. And if you got anything out of this video, then a thumbs up would go a long way. Plus, feel free to sub to the channel if you want to stick around for more of this ridiculous movie stuff in the future. And check back next week for whatever mess I decide to dig up next. But as always, thanks for watching, guys.